Get out. You're not welcome in this house anymore." My mother-in-law Helen's voice echoed through the mansion's marble foyer. Her face was twisted with rage as she threw my belongings onto the perfectly manicured lawn. Behind her, my husband David stood with his arm wrapped around a woman I'd never seen before, both of them wearing matching smirks. My name is Anna, and at 32, I was watching my decade-long marriage crumble on my in-laws' front lawn. But unlike what they expected, I wasn't crying or begging. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm as I watched Helen's performance. "You ungrateful witch." Helen continued her tirade. "How dare you accuse my David of trying to steal your money? He deserves that inheritance more than you ever did." I almost laughed at the irony. Just hours earlier, I discovered their elaborate plan to transfer my inheritance, the money my grandmother had left me, into an account they controlled. The account was conveniently registered under the name of Jessica, the woman now clutching my husband's arm. "Mom, don't waste your breath," David said, his voice dripping with contempt. "She's always been paranoid about her precious inheritance. That's why we had to be creative." Creative. That's what he called secretly meeting with lawyers to forge my signature. Creative was how he described planning to marry his mistress without divorcing me first, just to keep me from claiming my share of our marital assets. I calmly picked up my bag from the grass. "You're right, Helen. I should leave." My composed response clearly threw them off balance. They had expected tears, drama, perhaps even a scene they could use against me later. "That's it." Jessica spoke up for the first time, her young face confused. "You're just going to leave." I smiled, remembering the USB drive safely tucked in my pocket. Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. 3 hours earlier, I had arrived at the mansion for our weekly family dinner. Everything seemed normal. Helen fussing over David as usual, my father-in-law George buried in his newspaper. But when I went to use Helen's computer to print some documents for work, I found something interesting. Emails between her, David, and a lawyer discussing how to transfer Anna's assets without her knowledge. The plan was elaborate. They had been gathering my personal information for months, practicing my signature, even had a notary on their payroll. The final step was to have me sign what I thought would be renovation papers for our house, but would actually be documents transferring my inheritance to Jessica. What they didn't know was that I'd suspected something was wrong for weeks. David's sudden interest in my grandmother's inheritance, his mysterious phone calls, Helen's unusual questions about my bank accounts, it all added up to something suspicious. So I'd taken precautions. Hidden cameras in our house caught David's late-night meetings with Jessica and his mother, where they planned everything in detail. My phone recorded every conversation where Helen casually asked about my financial arrangements, and most importantly, I'd already moved my inheritance into a trust that only I could access. "You think you're so clever," Helen spat as I walked toward my car. "But you're nothing without this family. Nothing." I turned back one last time. "We'll see about that, Helen. Give me 3 months. Just 3 months." David laughed. 3 months for what? To beg for forgiveness?" "No," I replied, starting my car. 3 months for you to realize exactly what you've lost." As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror. Helen gesturing wildly, David holding Jessica, all of them probably congratulating themselves on getting rid of me so easily. They had no idea what was coming. I drove straight to my best friend Olivia's house. She opened the door before I could even knock, worry etched on her face. "Did you get what you needed?" I pulled out the USB drive. Everything. Every email, every forged document, every conversation about their little plan. I collapsed onto her couch, finally letting the events of the day sink in. They didn't even try to deny it, Liv. They were proud of their scheme. Olivia sat beside me, her lawyer instincts already kicking in. "Then they've handed us everything we need. The recordings, the emails, the witnesses, it's all admissible in court." I nodded, thinking about the next steps. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, securing my assets, gathering evidence, building a case that would be impossible to defend against. But watching David stand there with his mistress, seeing Helen's true colors on full display, it still hurt more than I expected. "You know what the funny part is?" I said, accepting the glass of wine Olivia offered. "They think they've won. They actually believe I walked away because I'm weak." Olivia smiled, a fierce protective glint in her eye. Then they clearly never knew the real you. So what's the plan? I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I needed. First, we call Robert Harrison, the federal investigator who's been waiting for evidence of Helen's financial fraud. Then, we let the dominoes fall exactly where I've lined them up. And David, Jessica? I smiled, thinking about the paper trail I discovered linking them to Helen's broader scheme. They chose their side. Now they get to go down with the ship. As night fell, I sat in Olivia's guest room, looking through old photos on my phone. 10 years of marriage reduced to evidence in a fraud case. But as I closed the photo album and opened my email to contact Investigator Harrison, I felt stronger than I had in years. They thought they were destroying me. Instead, they had freed me to take them all down. Let them enjoy their victory for now. In 3 months, they'd learn exactly who they were dealing with. The first signs that something was wrong appeared exactly 2 weeks after I left. I was having coffee with Olivia when my phone buzzed with a text from my father-in-law, George. "Anna, we need to talk. Something's not right with the company accounts." I showed the message to Olivia, who raised an eyebrow. Right on schedule. What George had discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. For years, Helen had been using the family's real estate company to run a sophisticated fraud scheme. My evidence didn't just prove their plan to steal my inheritance, it revealed a pattern of financial manipulation that went back decades. I texted back a simple response. Ask Helen of the Riverside Properties deal. Within minutes, my phone was flooded with calls. First from George, then Helen, and finally David. I ignored them all, knowing exactly what they found. The Riverside Properties transaction was Helen's biggest mistake, and the documentation I'd gathered proved she'd embezzled nearly $2 million through fake renovation contracts. "Your mother-in-law's been busy," Investigator Harrison said during our meeting that afternoon. He spread the documents across his desk, each page revealing another layer of fraud. "And your husband was actively helping her cover it up." I nodded, watching as he added my evidence to his growing file. They got careless. When they started planning to steal my inheritance, they left their other records vulnerable. "Mrs. Collins," Harrison leaned forward, his expression serious. "This is going to get ugly. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Helen's screaming face, David's smirk, Jessica's confused expression. They made it ugly when they planned to steal everything I had. The next day, federal agents arrived at Helen's office. I wasn't there to see it, but Olivia's colleague who worked in the same building described how Helen was escorted out, still shouting that it was all a misunderstanding. David called me that evening, his voice no longer smug. "What did you do?" he demanded. "Mom's been arrested." "I didn't do anything, David. The federal investigation into Helen's fraud has been ongoing for months. I just stopped helping hide it." "You're lying. You set this up." I could hear Jessica in the background, asking what was happening. "No, David. Your mother set this up when she decided to steal from her own company. You set this up when you helped her hide it." I just stopped being complicit. The silence on his end was deafening. "Oh, and David," I added, "you might want to check those documents you signed last month. The ones about the renovation project. They've been submitted to the investigation." He hung up without another word. Over the next few weeks, the truth about Helen's schemes unraveled spectacularly. The local papers ran stories about the prominent real estate family's fall from grace. Former employees came forward with their own evidence of fraud. Even George, once he realized the extent of his wife's deception, began cooperating with investigators. Jessica disappeared first, leaving David with nothing but a text message. "This isn't what I signed up for." Apparently, the promise of my inheritance wasn't worth facing federal fraud charges. I watched it all unfold from a safe distance, focusing on rebuilding my life. Olivia helped me find a new apartment, and I threw myself into my work, letting the investigators handle the rest. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. "Mrs. Collins?" Investigator Harrison's voice was triumphant. "We've frozen all their accounts. The evidence you provided led us to 6 other fraud schemes. They're looking at serious prison time." I sat down, feeling the weight of the past month lift from my shoulders. "And David?" "Your husband's been charged as an accomplice. We found his fingerprints all over the fake documents. He's looking at 5 to 10 years. That evening, as I sat on my new balcony watching the sunset, my phone lit up with a message from Helen. Even under house arrest, she couldn't help trying to have the last word. "You've destroyed this family," she wrote. "I hope you're happy." I thought about responding, about pointing out that she had destroyed her own family with her greed and manipulation. Instead, I simply blocked her number. 2 months had passed since that day on the lawn. 2 months of watching karma deliver exactly what they deserved. But sitting there, looking at the city lights, I realized I didn't feel victorious. I felt peaceful. They had tried to take everything from me, but in doing so, they had given me something invaluable. Freedom from their toxicity and the strength to stand up for myself. As I reached for my wine glass, my phone buzzed one last time. It was George. "Anna," his message read, "I'm sorry. I should have seen it sooner." I looked at those words for a long time, thinking about how different things might have been if he'd stopped Helen years ago. But the past was the past. The future, however, was looking surprisingly bright. 1 month left in my promised 3 months, and already their perfect little world had crumbled. But the final piece of my plan was still to come, and for that, I needed to make just one more phone call. "Hello," I said when the line connected. "This is Anna Collins. I'd like to schedule a meeting about purchasing Riverside properties." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same property that had exposed Helen's fraud would now become the foundation of my new beginning. Let them think they'd won that day on the lawn. Their victory had lasted exactly 2 weeks. My victory? That would last a lifetime. The 3-month mark arrived on a crisp autumn morning. I stood outside the courthouse, adjusting my blazer as reporters gathered on the steps. Today was Helen's sentencing hearing, and the media was eager to cover the downfall of one of the city's most prominent families. "Ready for this?" Olivia asked, standing beside me with her briefcase. I nodded, watching David and his father arrive separately. David looked nothing like the smug man who'd stood with his mistress 3 months ago. His designer suits had been replaced by an ill-fitting department store number, his confident strut now a defeated shuffle. The hearing proceeded exactly as expected. Helen, despite her tearful pleas for leniency, was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The judge was particularly harsh given her attempts to frame others for her crimes, including a last-ditch effort to claim I had orchestrated everything. "Mrs. Harrison Collins," the judge addressed me directly after announcing the sentence. "The court acknowledges your cooperation in exposing this fraud. Your inheritance will remain protected under the trust you established." I caught Helen's venomous glare from the defendant's table. This wasn't how she'd imagined things playing out when she'd thrown my belongings onto her lawn. David was sentenced next, 5 years for his role in the fraud scheme. As they led him away, he looked back at me one last time. "I never thought you'd fight back," he said quietly. "That was your first mistake," I replied. Outside the courthouse, George approached me. He'd aged years in just 3 months, the stress of everything etching deep lines in his face. "Anna, I know it doesn't mean much now, but I truly am sorry." I studied the man who'd stood silently by while his wife and son plotted to steal everything from me. "You're right, George. It doesn't mean much now, but maybe someday it will." Later that afternoon, I had one final meeting, the closing on Riverside Properties. The irony wasn't lost on anyone when I submitted the winning bid for the property that had exposed Helen's fraud. I planned to transform it into affordable housing for domestic abuse survivors, a project that would erase Helen's toxic legacy and create something meaningful in its place. "Quite a 3 months," Olivia remarked as we celebrated that evening. "You said they'd regret it, but I don't think even you expected all this." I swirled my wine, thinking about everything that had transpired. They thought they were punishing me that day, throwing me out like I was nothing. But they gave me exactly what I needed, the push to stop protecting them from themselves. The local paper ran one final story about the case the next day. The headline read, "Family Fraud Scheme Exposed. Justice Prevails." Below it was a quote from investigator Harrison. "Sometimes the people we think are victims turn out to be the strongest among us." I kept a copy of that paper, not as a reminder of their betrayal, but of my own strength. 3 months had changed everything, but the biggest change was in me. I was no longer the woman they thought they could discard. I was someone stronger, someone who fought back. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Jessica. I should have known better. "I'm sorry." I deleted the message without responding. Her apology, like Helen's schemes and David's betrayal, belonged in the past. My future was ahead of me, and for the first time in years, I was actually excited to see what it held. Standing on the balcony of my new apartment that evening, I raised a glass to myself. Here's to 3 months, I whispered to the city lights, and to all the years ahead. They had tried to write my ending that day on the lawn. Instead, they had only written their own. My story? It was just beginning. The final papers arrived a week later. My divorce was official, Helen's assets were forfeit, and Riverside Properties was mine. As I signed the last document, I remembered Helen's words, "You're nothing without this family." She was right about one thing. I was nothing like their family, and that had turned out to be my greatest strength.